If you're living in flood zone AE and you're paying more than $2,000 a year for flood insurance, I have some good news for you today that could save you thousands yearly on flood insurance. No, I'm not talking about switching flood insurance companies. I'm not even talking about changing your deductible. I'm talking about one document that could save you thousands, just like it did me. In today's video, I'm going to show you what this document is, how to read this document, and how to use it to potentially save thousands. So let's get started. But before we do, I need you to do me a favor. I need you to share, subscribe, and like the channel below. Hi, I'm Chris with the Flood Insurance Guru. For more than a decade, I've been helping homeowners like yourself save on flood insurance and understanding flood risks. After I bought a house in the flood zone myself and almost lost my house, but guess what saved me from losing that house? An elevation certificate, which is what we're talking about in today's video. So first of all, let's talk about what is an elevation certificate. An elevation certificate is a certificate that is filled out with different elevation numbers of your property, like where your machinery is located, the lowest adjacent grade of your floor, the support beams, all these different things, and they're compared to what's called the base flood elevation. This is your flood level. This lets people know if you're negative on that or positive, and that can have a big impact on your premiums. Now look, there's a lot of technology today that's really helping where people don't have to have an elevation certificate anymore. In fact, it was required on post-firm structures, which typically were structures that built after like 1981. That's typically not the requirement anymore. However, that doesn't mean this document doesn't still save you money like it did me years ago. In fact, it saved me more than $30,000 over the course of a mortgage. It even changed my flood zone, which removed the requirement for flood insurance. So first of all, on this elevation certificate, let's talk about these different elevation numbers. What you want to look for on here is your base flood elevation. If you're in flood zone AE, there should definitely be one in there. And if you're looking at elevation certificate, more than likely it's in section B9. Then on the next section is section C. If you have a newer elevation certificate, this is going to show the different elevations of your property. Top of the floor, the next floor, lowest machinery, all these different things. And then the lowest adjacent grade. These things all play an important role in determining your flood insurance with the National Flood Insurance Program and even private flood insurance companies. As I said, the higher you are above this base flood elevation, the bigger of an impact it could have on your premiums and even changing your flood zone. Now, when changing your flood zone, one of the things you really want to pay particular attention to is what's called lowest adjacent grade. If this is usually at least 6 inches above the base of flood elevation, that means you got a good chance of changing your flood zone, helping increase your property value, just like I did more than a decade ago. All right, so now we'll talk briefly how to read this. Now, how do you know if this thing's valid? Well, there's a few things you need to look for. First of all, you need to look for a seal or stamp from a surveyor or a professional engineer. These are typically the two people that are able to do this document because they have to sign off on it. They have to have a certain license. So that's who can do your elevation certificate. Now, let's talk about briefly, typically how much do these cost? On average across the country, we typically see these elevation certificates cost from $800 to $1,200. Now, maybe way less somewhere else, but somewhere like New York might be $2,000. We have seen that before. Now, we've talked about all this. What if you've already got flood insurance? How could you use an elevation certificate? Well, if you decide to go and get an elevation certificate, and let's just say you've got a National Flood Insurance Program policy, you could turn it in if you see that it's going to benefit you. Here's the good news though. It's not going to hurt you. If it does benefit you though, the National Flood Insurance Program will actually go back to the effective date of that policy for that current year, and they'll prorate your premium if the elevation certificate helps. This means that you potentially could get a refund from the federal government. Sounds crazy, doesn't it? But it does happen. Rarely, but it does happen. Now let's talk about private flood insurance. Now with private flood insurance, typically they're not going to prorate that. They may not really even use the elevation certificate that much, but I would still turn it into them to see if it could potentially help you. A lot of different companies, you want to just email them or email your flood insurance agent and say, hey, I got this elevation certificate. I want to see if it's going to help my flood insurance premium, if there's a way to get this prorated in the middle of the term here. Now here's the other thing though, with this elevation certificate is it's when we talk about saving you thousands potentially in changing your flood zone. You typically need to have this elevation certificate, a property deed, subdivision tax map, a couple other things if you want to do what's called a letter of map amendment to change your flood zone, like I did. Now this takes about 30 to 60 days to get done, but then when you get a letter back from your bank, you could turn this into your flood insurance company stating that flood insurance is no longer required. But what I want you to remember is when you go through and you do this, it doesn't mean your risk of flooding is changing. It just means the requirement is changing based on the elevation of your property. There's a lot of different factors here that can still impact premiums, like distance to water, type of flooding frequency, the replacement cost of your building. Now, if you want a deeper dive into some different things we've done on elevation certificates, you can click up here in the corner of this video to see what we've done on elevation certificates. Now, in doing this though, here's one of the questions we get asked, and that is, do I have to get an elevation certificate every year? No. Typically, you only have to get an elevation certificate once. The only way that might change is if something like a flood map's changed, the base flow elevation's changed, it might make that elevation certificate invalid. We have seen that before. So this is not a document you have to get done every year, but it may be something you have to get done every 5 to 10 years if you want to try to use it to save money on your premiums. Now, we talked about saving money on the premiums. Now look, something else, when you're looking at this elevation certificate, and you're probably thinking to yourself, hey, what if I increase my deductible? Now, we've watched some other ones here, and you can click on the corner of this video here to take a deeper dive to see how flood insurance deductibles really impact your premium. It's one of the biggest myths out there, and that way this can give you an idea of what's going to happen with those flood insurance premiums when you turn in an elevation certificate, maybe change that deductible and different things like this. So if you live in flood zone AE, this is exactly how you can use an elevation certificate to potentially save thousands on your flood insurance. If you do want to potentially look at some different flood insurance options, in the description of this video, you can reach out to us, and it's 3 simple steps. Step 1, fill out the form on our website. Step 2, connect with myself or one of our flood risk advisors. And step 3, finalize your policy. It's that it. You may not be ready for that, and that's okay. We've still got a guide down here in the description of this video that walks you through the difference with the National Flood Insurance Program and private flood insurance, and helping you understand these different flood insurance options and what you need to know as a homeowner. I'm Chris with the Flood Insurance Guru, and I want to say thank you for watching today's video on how to use an elevation certificate to potentially save thousands of dollars on your flood insurance. Thank you.